And I think this next talk will segue really nicely from what Brett was talking about. You know, one of the big megatrends he was describing was towards automation, towards artificial intelligence and the employment implications of that. So Dr. Catriona Wallace is our next speaker. Artificial intelligence is the fastest growing tech sector in the world, valued over $300 billion in the last year. It's been predicted it'll remove 85 million jobs, but it might generate more jobs than that in the next 2 years alone. But what about the ethics of AI? Who's going to look after that? The people running the AI, the government? What is responsible AI? How do we do it? So Dr. Catriona Wallace is an expert in this field, in the field of AI. She's an adjunct professor, chair of an AI venture capital fund, and won the business and entrepreneur category at the Australian Financial Review's Women of Influence Awards. A couple of years ago, she will share best practices in responsible AI, some useful case studies, and discuss how you can step into being an ethical leader. Please welcome Catriona.
Good morning. It's so beautiful to be with you on this sort of sunny day in this extraordinary land of Sydney, North Sydney. And I would love to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land here in Sydney, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also welcome any Indigenous people in the room with us today. Why I love to always include an acknowledgement of country when I'm talking about artificial intelligence is that I think that we have a huge role to offer our First Nations people. So if you think about what AI is, and Brett touched on some of it, I'm going to touch on more of it. AI is all around data. And when we look at what machine learning is, which is the ability for machines to learn on their own accord by doing tasks over and over again, they essentially make sense of data through pattern making. And it is recognised internationally that the most established and intelligent pattern makers in the world are in fact Australia's First Nations people. So I would love us to see a greater level of inclusion, not only around gender, which is what we often talk about, and I'll talk more about that today, or racial neurodiversity, issues diversity, but also a much more active and deeper involvement of our Indigenous communities into how we're going to map out this future tech world that we're in. And I love coming on the back of Brett when we talk, because I'm actually going to take some of the topics that he talked about, such as augmented reality glasses, which I carry with me everywhere, and deep dive into the ethical and responsible nature of it. And so I'm probably going to start today with reminding us that AI has actually been around since 1956, which was when AI was originally coined in Dartmouth University by some data scientists there who recognised that software could mimic human intelligence. And that's the most basic definition that we have of AI. So we're going to start there. We're going to move all the way through to talk about what's going on in AI. I come from a strong fintech background, so we'll talk about fintech. And then by the end of my presentation, I'm going to have launched you very firmly into the metaverse and into Web3 and all the AI that's underpinning that. But let's start and find out what you guys are doing with artificial intelligence. So I'd love you just to join together at your tables and just share, let's go for 3 or 4 minutes, what your organisation is currently doing with AI. Now, you may know, you may be right across it, or you might actually have not a huge idea at all. Doesn't matter. So let's just do 3 or 4 minutes at the table. Love a bit of cool background music, AV dudes, and let's just talk about where your organisation is up to with artificial intelligence. Perhaps you're at the initial planning stage, perhaps you've done a lot of work, perhaps you think you've actually got really strong AI first strategies. Let's go 3 or 4 minutes. What are you guys doing? Alrighty, let's come back together as a group. And I'd love to hear, if we think about those categories, we may be just starting out on our AI journey. You know, we've done a few things, but it's not a full-blown strategy across the organisation, right through to, yes, we have an AI-first strategy and we are deep in the AI field. Who would like to, let's start right in the middle. Who's kind of like, we're doing a few things, we're not really fully mature in AI, but we've got a few AI projects going. Hands up. A few tentative, nervous hands in the room. Okay, who, we really haven't done too much. We're thinking and we're sort of planning, but we haven't done too much AI in our organisation. Hands up. Yep, quite a few. And who thinks that their organisation is like pretty mature and fully into the old AI field? Okay, is that Brett and no one else? So quite a few of you didn't put your hands up. But this is not surprising for me in an Australian audience, because I have to tell you that we as Australians are way, way, way behind the rest of the world with regard to artificial intelligence. So in 2020, which was the last time there was an international measure of the comparative level of investment, of private investment into AI, Australia had $300 million invested into AI startups and other related companies. So 300 million. We go to the US and it was $1.9 billion at the same time. And we go to China and it's the equivalent of $9 billion of investment. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that we are potentially going to become a country, a backwater country where Silicon Valley and potentially Chinese entrepreneurs come to make money if we do not step up our level of investment and use into AI. So we know, for whatever reason, Australian business leaders, when we come to emerging technologies, are a bit risk averse. We like to sit around kind of pretty comfortable and not take risk, which is going to be a problem going forward. You saw all the things that Brett talked about. All of those things are a bit experimental. We as the futurists, we're not exactly sure everything that's going to come in the future, but we've got some pretty good ideas of what's likely to come. Unless we as Australians take some risk, we're going to be left behind. And so what is AI and what can it do for you? So as we mentioned, AI technology that mimics human intelligence, and what it's pretty useful for is efficiency, automating things. And if we think of AI, a very simple way to think about it is that we have some data, normally big data, we have algorithms, we have analytics, then decision making, then automation. That's kind of the AI stack. Analytics, algorithms, data, algorithms, analytics, decision making, and automation. And so that process is really good for making things more efficient. And as James mentioned in part of my introduction, the World Economic Forum predicts in the next 2 years that 85 million jobs will be removed from the global workforce because of the coming of artificial intelligence. And 92 million jobs will be created because of the coming of artificial intelligence. Now, is it the 85 million who are going to take the 92 million jobs? What do you think? Probably not. The 90% of the 85 million who will lose their jobs are the jobs of women, minorities, and youth, because they are the entry-level jobs. They are the front service counters. They are the back-end office. They are the administrative jobs in financial services. And indeed, in financial services, we know that at least 40% of all jobs in this sector will be automated within the next 3 years. So how are we thinking about this, and who is leading this? So in addition to efficiency being something that AI will be really good at, so I was an AI entrepreneur, built a business out of New York. We built a subject matter expert brain out of machine learning called semi-supervised machine learning, and we sold this to banks so that they didn't need to rely on their humans to know all about their products. They could rely on the machine. The machine, sometimes called Tron by some of the banks, didn't need to sleep, didn't get sick, didn't get paid, was always there and available. So I love the fact that Brett just comes out really boldly and says it as it is. Because a lot of AI community go, oh, it's all around augmentation. We're going to augment the humans. I actually agree with Brett. We are probably going to be replacing the humans with these machines. Now, the great thing that AI can do, in addition to efficiency, is analytics and helping you make better decisions. And so the way machine learning works is essentially you just fill the machine full of data, and it does what we call sort of a self-analyzing library and analysis that will come out with results or with answers that you didn't even know you needed to know. So this is the value of machine learning, that it can produce great brand new insights because it can analyze things in a different way to what humans can do, and do it far more powerfully than humans. And we're thinking about the power of AI. When AI was invented back in 1956, compared to then to now, we have 1 trillion times more computing power today than we had back then. So this is how vast and how powerful this sector of artificial intelligence is. So we know it's going to replace jobs. We know financial services will be under the spotlight. So we need to think about what we do. And we also need to think about, in Australia, how many more workers do we need in this sector to remain in any way able to play on the international stage? So the numbers at the moment are that Australia needs 1.2 million more high-tech people in our economy just to keep us at the level we are, which is, as I said, already a bit behind. We need 160,000 more data scientists. So this is by the end of the end of the decade, so by 2030. We need 160,000 more data scientists by 2030 as well. Where are they going to come from is a really beautiful question. And how is the government thinking about artificial intelligence? Well, last year, the previous government announced it was going to put $124 million into building Australia's AI capability. Now, I am a chair of a venture capital fund, and I was with another VC friend of mine over the weekend who runs Westpac's venture capital arm. Simon Cant, his name is. And I said to Simon, hey, Si, what's your fund? How much money have you got in your fund now? He goes, oh, yeah, we've got $150 million is in our fund. And in Artesian Capital, which is the fund that owns the BOAB AI accelerator that I chair, they have $400 million in their fund. So that is individual venture capitalists, much more money than the entire government invests in Australia. And so this remains a concern. And why might this be the case? It is possibly because we've never had a burning platform like the US had. They had to innovate their way out of the global financial crisis and all the other crises that they have. We've actually been very lucky. We haven't had major disruption. We haven't really had the really severe impact back in 2008 that global financial crisis was. And we weren't really that impacted by the pandemic. In other countries, we've seen during the last 12 months in the pandemic, 5 years of technology acceleration compared to what we expected. And with that technology acceleration has come this powerful interest in artificial intelligence, but also the emergence of things such as Web3 and the metaverse, which I'm also going to talk to you about. Just excuse me, I'm just recovering on the back, not COVID, just of a little cold. So, question is, big moving, fast moving AI tech sector, who's leading it? The government? Maybe. As we said, not really. And how is it being regulated? So at the moment, there are no laws or rules that regulate artificial intelligence anywhere really in the world. The EU has the first draft legislation for artificial intelligence that is being considered and negotiated. There is no laws that govern. So me as an AI entrepreneur, in what my tech does or how it's deployed. There are certainly domain rules and regulations that if we're deploying AI, it would need to adhere to, but really there's not any laws or regulation. And that's because the technology is just way ahead of where government and the regulators are at. And so what are we going to do about that? And what may be the downside of AI? So in an unregulated world of technology, there's some very dark things that can happen. And I'll give you an example. So one of the great case studies of all time for fintech gone badly with AI is the Apple Card. Any of you remember this story? Goldman Sachs and the Apple Card? Okay, so this is about 12 months ago. So Goldman Sachs and Apple got together. We'll do an automated AI-based credit card. That sounds like a cool idea. We'll go and get some data. We'll train some algorithms. We'll do some analytics. We'll automate it. It'll make some decisions, and then it'll allocate the credit to people who apply. So that went out very virally across social media, and people starting to just put in their credit details to get their Apple Card credit. And a certain person who was the co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak, put in his credit details, and his wife, Mrs. Wozniak, put in her credit details, and they applied to get individual credit. So assuming in a fair and just world, Mr. Wozniak, Mrs. Wozniak would get the same amount of credit. They have the same financial details. But in fact, that didn't happen at all. What happened was Mrs. Wozniak got 10 times less credit than Mr. Wozniak. And overall, of all the millions of people that applied, women, on average, got 20 times less credit than the men did. So how does that happen? And how the heck does that happen with Goldman Sachs and Apple? These are not two small companies kind of fiddling around. These are two big-ass, well-known companies. Well, what happened with that was the way they had built their AI was taking historical data sets, which had already a very poor representation of women in there, to train the algorithms, to do the analytics, to make the decision, to automate the credit decision. And so that story all starts with the big data they used was biased against women and no doubt minorities as well. So one of the big questions that we have is, what happens if we take these historical data sets and use them to train the algorithms, whether it's in financial services or human services or anything else? What happens then? Are we just hard coding the biases of history into the machines, as Brett said, at scale that will run the world and make decisions? Well, the answer to that is, yeah, that is actually probably what we're doing. And that is a real problem. We have another example with Amazon. So Amazon, again, big-ass technology company, think they'd know, was recruiting people into their business. So they took some historical data, trained their algorithms, did some analytics, made some decisions about who would be recommended in to get a job in Amazon. Anyway, what happened is that the historical data really reflected on the traditional hiring policy of actually it's all about men. So in the artificial intelligence field, 9 in 10 people globally are males, only 1 in 10 are females. And in Amazon, which is a big AI company, essentially the AI learned that it should only recommend men in to be recruited. And if anyone had on their CV that the AI was reading that they went to women's college or played women's hockey or did anything that mentioned anything to do with the feminine, then they would be excluded from the recruitment process. So this again went viral, was terrible. Another example, Optum Health, big healthcare, international healthcare company, used historical data to train the algorithms to allocate specialist healthcare needs. The historical data discriminated against lower socioeconomic people and only referred additional healthcare and emergency healthcare to people from a higher socioeconomic, typically white background. Another company, Babylon, used historical data to train a wearable app to detect heart attack. And if you had wearing this device and you started to get shortness of breath, pain in your arm, and it would detect you were having a heart attack before you actually had that heart attack, it would alert emergency services, alert your doctor, and an ambulance would rush towards you. So that was okay if you were a male. But if you were a female, what it typically did would measure it as a panic attack and not send medical help. So the world now is currently plagued with these real problems of bias, harm, and what we call unintended consequences of artificial intelligence. So what do we do about that? Question before. Can the government lead this? Well, they try, and I work very closely with the ministers, both in New South Wales and in federal government, including good conversations with Minister Ed Husic now, very close relationship with Victor Dominello in New South Wales. Also the Human Rights Commission, the E-Safety Commissioner, about how do we position Australia to be a responsible AI country, a nation of trusted technology. Because to be honest, we're not famous for anything else, really, in the tech field. So there is an opportunity for us to do something with responsible AI. So let's talk about what that is and why we want to do it. So responsible AI is a whole of business strategy of which ethical AI is one part. And responsible AI starts from the board, investors, executive team, governance, assessments, policies, procedures and practices around designing and deploying AI in a manner that is consistent with strong ethical standards, with societal norms, with organisational values, and with regulation if it exists. And the ethical AI part of that has 8 core principles, which I'll step you through. Now, these 8 core principles are pretty much global, and Minister Karen Andrews, when she was the minister in the previous government, I worked on her task group to come up with these principles. So these are what they are. And the way to think about this is, if you want to build a responsible AI strategy in business, here are the principles and the framework that you would use to do that. So the first one is, if you're building AI, designing it, deploying it, AI must be built with human, society, and the environment benefit in mind. It cannot come at a cost to any of those 3 groups. Number 1 principle. Number 2 principle. AI must be built with human-centered values at its core. Now, what is a human-centered value? And is the human-centered value of me the same as the human-centered value of you, the same as the human-centered value in Brazil or China and India? Big question. But that is the principle. Number 3, AI must be fair. It must not discriminate, like the examples I've just given. The next principle, AI must be reliable and safe. Principle 5, it must adhere to privacy and security requirements. Number 6, it must be transparent and explainable. So I'll bring Mrs. Wozniak back into the picture now. So Mrs. Wozniak is at home. She's pretty pissed. She's got 10 times less credit than Steve, and she goes, okay, this is not good enough. I am going to contest this decision of my 10 times less credit. And so the sixth principle of an ethical AI framework is contestability. So if you were a responsible AI company, you would have a process where Mrs. Wozniak could come and contest the decision that the AI made. And in all the examples that Brett gave of super fast, super smart, scalable fintech, then all of that will be pretty much enabled by AI and machine learning. And if you were to be using this fintech and were a responsible AI company, you would have a contestability strategy or process for your customers to come in and contest. So that is actually the seventh principle, is contestability. The sixth principle, jumping back, is that once Mrs. Wozniak has come and contested that decision, you, as the responsible AI company, need to make it transparent and explainable. So that would be taking Mrs. Wozniak down to see the data scientists who got the data, who did the algorithms, who made the machine that gave this decision, and they would have to be transparent, which means they need to open the box of AI and show Mrs. Wozniak how the machine, the software, made the decision about her credit limit. Not only does she have to have a look at it, but they also need to explain it. So the sixth principle is transparent and explainable AI. Now we talk about AI being a black box because what actually happens in AI machine learning is the machines learn each time they do something, and then they change and they adapt. And sometimes the original programmers then have no way of explaining what these smart machines are doing because they are able to learn on their own account. So we really encourage you to think about white box AI and what they call XAI, explainable AI. So Mrs. Wozniak comes in, she's allowed to contest it, we take it down, we show her what went on, and explain how the algorithms made this decision. And then the last principle, the eighth principle, is accountability. So then, in this case, Goldman Sachs and Apple would need to be accountable to Mrs. Wozniak, but not only them, potentially the vendor of the software who sold it to Goldman Sachs and Apple would also need to be accountable, and potentially some reparation, some making good of the fact that this AI made mistakes or discriminated in this case. So they are the 8 principles of ethical AI which sit within a greater remit of responsible AI. So that's where we are today, which is super exciting and super interesting. And as I mentioned, Australia has a huge opportunity to step up and into taking a lead with regard to responsible AI. I spent a lot of time with the head of Facebook, now Meta's global AI team end of last year. And if we think about Meta or Facebook, they have 19,000 algorithms, 1,800 machine learning engineers. And only in June last year did they announce their responsible AI strategy. So they are now in the process of retrofitting responsibility and ethics to tens of thousands of algorithms. And in my conversation with them, I really did not believe that that was going to be something that they could possibly do. So we want to be on the front foot, and in your organisations, with whomever is leading or starting to think about AI, then I'd love you just to step into that concept of being an ethical leader and think about how do you actually call out, is this data set biased? Are these algorithms, is this the best fit model? Are there any unintended consequences from what our machine will do? Okay, and now I'm just going to jump straight into the next exciting phase of the world we're in. So we're trying to catch up with AI in Australia. We'll do a reasonable job at that, I think, in the next couple of years. Labor government come in with $1 billion tech fund. That's a great sign for progress. So I wanted to introduce, I carry these with me, also virtual reality goggles with me. Brett mentioned them. These are augmented reality glasses. Don't know if you can see that there's like a little screen in this one here. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. the screen. So I wear and use these all the time. I also use virtual reality goggles to enter what we call the metaverse. Who's clear on what the metaverse is? Yeah, a few of you? Okay, let me quickly describe that. So the metaverse is predicted to be bigger than when the internet arrived. The metaverse is related to Web3 technologies, but slightly to the side. The metaverse is a concept, not a one thing. And it is a concept of virtual worlds, often accessed through augmented or virtual reality goggles, that allow people to go in to a virtual world which replicates really this physical world plus more to make social connections. That's kind of the definition of the metaverse. And we have organisations such as Meta or Facebook announcing last year they are putting on 10,000 workers to build their metaverse out in the next 5 years. We have Fortnite Games, who is owned by Epic Games, who are also building a huge metaverse. Super interesting little bit of trivia I learned the other day. So, who do you think is the biggest cosmetic company in the world? You might think it's L'Oreal or Chanel or Shiseido or one of these. It's actually Fortnite Games. Fortnite Games sells $3 billion worth of virtual cosmetics a year to their gamers. Extraordinary. Dubai has just announced that they are investing $4 billion in the next few years to build out their metaverse and creating 40,000 virtual jobs. So in the metaverse, we will now start to see much more interest, particularly in financial services and new financial models. So in the metaverse, we typically, if we want to enter a metaverse such as Decentraland, Sandbox, Upland, where you go to buy virtual property, so these sites, you don't actually need 3D goggles, you can do it in 2D, you actually can buy virtual property. And I'm just about to buy some land. I've got an office for a new organisation I've just launched called the Responsible Metaverse Alliance. We've got an NFT, a non-fungible token digital office, now that I'm looking to put in Decentraland and probably Sandbox. And to get into these lands, we need a crypto wallet. And so I get a crypto wallet, I use MetaMask, I put on my augmented or virtual reality goggles, I go into the metaverse where I'm going to place my office, and then I can wander around and speak to up to, in the metaverse at the moment, there's about 100 million daily users. So the metaverse is a whole other topic that I would love to share with you another day. But what I want to let you know is we're struggling to do responsible AI, as I mentioned. We're also, as Australians, struggling to do advanced tech really well and keep up. The metaverse is here now, and you're going to hear more and more and more about it, underpinned by Web3, and Web3 being the semantic web, the machine-readable web. Blockchain, crypto, a completely different financial world than what we're used to. So my call for you is this. We as Australians have a great opportunity to start to step into being responsible technologists for artificial intelligence, for Web3 and for the metaverse, and particularly those of you in and around financial services. It will be new financial models that come up, and we need these to be responsible and to be ethical. So I would just like to invite you all, because we're not seeing leadership from the tech company, the tech giants, nor necessarily yet from the government, just for you to consider working with the principles of ethics and technology that I shared, and for you to step in to being responsible technology leaders in your organisation. Thank you.
Catriona, very interesting. If you've got a question, put your hand up. Let me start with one.
Yeah.
If you're an organisation that's developing some new technologies or programs or whatever that uses some AI,
Yeah.
how do you avoid these unintended consequences? We've seen some of them in the wonderful world of rugby league over the last few days that no one imagined. How do you anticipate things that are perhaps unlikely, but may happen and result in an unfair outcome?
Yeah, such a great question. And this is the language that we use, which is we want to avoid harms that we know will happen if a machine makes a decision a certain way, and we want to avoid unintended consequences. So these are the ones that we don't really know will happen, but we need to try and get some measure of them. Now, my greatest piece of advice is, what typically happens in organisations is that the decision, and it's quite as simple as, here is the line, this is ethical and this is not. That's it. There is a line that's drawn.
Is it a line though, or is it kind of a wobbly thing?
It should be a line. Because AI is mathematical, it needs to be a line.
Right.
So who decides on that line? I would advise it's not your data scientists. And that's where we see it being pushed down. We see it all pushed down to the data scientists making a decision on what's fair and what's not fair, or what's ethical and what's not ethical, or these group get this and this group get that. But it must not be. It must be the business leaders. And this is the real trick we have with AI, because previously there used to be like three, kind of the chain of command was like frontline, managers, executives. Now we have AI, frontline, managers, AI, executives. There's a control and a monitoring gap there. So my encouragement is that for all of you who are business leaders, you cannot delegate that authority to where that fairness line is.
It's got to be at the top.
Yep.
Yeah. Peter Volandis, for example.
Yep.
That's not a rugby league joke. I now understand that you guys have no interest.
Yeah, no idea. No,
Won't do
zero
it
idea.
anymore.
Yeah.
Should it be a government job? Or are they too slow? And
The government would love to do that. And I imagine in time we'll get regulation, but it's too slow.
yeah, they'll get onto it in 2032, and they'll have something that's relevant for 2022.
Pretty much.
Yeah, okay. Any questions out there? Yep.
Hi, that was a really interesting presentation. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, obviously with the digitization of finance, we're conscious of certain communities that don't have access to internet and the like falling behind. With the introduction of the metaverse, that's a whole new area. How do we stay conscious and take everybody on the journey?
I love you for asking that question. That is the best question of all.
So better than the one you said I asked, that you said was a very good question.
yours was actually quite obvious.
Right.
But this is so beautiful, right? So, metaverse coming. Are we likely to face greater division between the have and have-nots? Very, very possibly. So these augmented reality glasses are like the cheapest ones on the market. They are maybe $1,200. Augmented virtual reality goggles that I have, which unfortunately I had to buy from Meta, but the Quest 2, $450. So they've come down from where they used to be. Microsoft HoloLens, which is really the AR glasses that I want, $5,500. So who is going to pay for that? And does that mean that people from underserved communities just won't be able to afford it?
But isn't it like all things, and that they'll get cheaper as they become?
Probably. And I'm working, so at the moment, my company's been commissioned to write the metaverse strategy for the New South Wales government. And in that strategy, we're really talking about capability building. Part of it is I'm going to put like massive pressure on the tech giants to provide, or the government to provide technology to the underserved communities, or else we will have that same have and have not. So thank you for thinking about that.
Catriona versus Google. Who else? Yep.
Yeah, thanks from me too. Really great speech. Got lots of notes there. My question is about big data and machine learning. Obviously, the bigger the data, the more and better quality inferences can be made. Is this going to give kind of yet another advantage to big players who already have the advantage of the network effect, if you like Meta, for example, against the would-be smaller, nimbler players in the market?
Yes. Yeah. That's right, yeah. So the questions around it, would big companies then access some big data sets, and big data sets make more accurate, better AI? Yeah, probably. But what we're seeing is some new innovations, such as what we call synthetic data. So synthetic data is where you have a data set and you might be missing a bunch, or you actually need it to be bigger. There are mathematical programs to synthesize data sets to put into your bigger data set.
When you say synthesize, do you kind of mean make up? It sounds like makeup.
No, I don't mean makeup. But it is a proxy because it's not actually real, right? So with that comes some risk.
Yeah.
So there are some ways to do it, but when we're thinking about the topics that we're talking about today, the young startup fintechs, etc., will they have the same access to those big data sets? Possibly, possibly not. We need to watch that. But my big backing is that the big banks, as we know them today, will be very challenged by the smaller fintechs. And the smaller fintechs will be clever in how they get data, clever in how they synthesize data in order to potentially then outcompete the big banks. That's what I see will probably happen. Thank you. Beautiful question.
Anyone? Yeah. Mike's coming.
Thank you very much for the beautiful talk. And my question is, so I'm with CMC Markets, which is an online broker, and we are conscious of AI, but we don't know where to start. So what's your advice in companies who wants to take up the trend and have a ride? Where should we start? What should we be cautious about when we start the projects, or start thinking about adopting AI into our business?
I'm no expert, but you'll definitely need a computer.
Thank you. Yeah, that answers it all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. So where do you start? So I would start straight off with thinking about, if we're doing AI, we're doing responsible AI. So just put that straight in the strategy. It needs to be responsible, because then you're not going to come years later or months later and try and retrofit like Facebook's had to do. So do it responsible AI. The best way is to start just doing little tests and trials. And interestingly, somewhat disturbingly, only 87% of AI trials go into production, go into major rollout. So only 1 in 10 actually get up and go into full production.
But that ratio is pretty normal for any innovation. Most things fail.
Yeah, correct.
And you only get success if you persevere.
Yeah, correct. So it would be and the greatest thing to do is, don't trial AI for the sake of AI. It looks cool and does automated stuff. Everyone else is doing it. We need to do it. You need to find a use case, so some problem in your business that has resisted other solutions. So if you've already got some non-AI app that's doing a good job in solving that problem, don't kick it out. That's good enough. Find a problem or a gap where it's been technology resistant, trial the AI in there, but make sure it's a good commercial outcome associated with it. So typically we would want every $1 you spend in AI, you get $10 back in efficiency or better decision making or something like that. But make sure it's not just we're just trialing it for the sake of it. Here's a problem, let's go and find a solution for that. And then you just test and learn whilst working with the board or the governance team to build a responsible AI strategy over the top.
And just because your first crack at it doesn't work, doesn't mean...
No, don't go, this
doesn't mean, this AI
is rubbish.
Yeah.
Throw that out.
So, probably will fail the first time, and then you have to get better and better and learn, build up the learnings in the company and your group, and we did that last time, so we won't do that again because that didn't work, all that stuff, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Can I ask you one? Any others? We've got time for one more. I'm going to ask you a quick one. The overlapping Venn diagrams of the metaverse and banking and finance. Yeah. Like, is there one?
Oh, there totally is one.
Yeah, give us some examples.
Yeah, so, okay. I'm just going to give a story. Is that okay? Okay, so I have a lot of children. I have 6.
Like, you notice how she had to...
I do, because like an adopted one as well. So there's like 6, 4 boys, 2 girls. 2 of the boys have left their full-time work and now work in the metaverse. And so one of them, Jaden, builds Japanese, European and modernist homes for people who buy virtual property in the metaverse. So last year, $500 million of virtual property was sold. This year, it'll be $1 billion. So you buy virtual property in the metaverse. You want to put a house there, right? So these houses cost about $300. You can't buy them with cash. Obviously, you have to buy them with crypto or trade NFTs to get them. But
Well, why do you do that? Why do you buy the house?
Well, why wouldn't you?
Well, because it's $300 you could buy on lollies or something.
Okay, so here's the thing in the metaverse. Brett talked about it as well. There's no scarcity. In Decentraland, I go to buy a plot of land. They've run out because they've sold them it all. Doesn't matter. Make some more. It's virtual. No, scarcity doesn't really exist in the metaverse. So what if I am at home here in Australia and I've never been able to afford my own home? What if I can't afford my own home? Now in the metaverse, I can buy a beautiful, beautiful home. I can buy paintings and garden furniture and things. So that is why you would do it. You come home from your shitty job, you put on your virtual reality goggles at the end of the day, you go into one of these worlds and you go and you lounge around in your...
So if it's immersive, I get it.
It's immersive, it's insanely good. I just got one more story. So, financial story. So, okay, there is a story of a guy called Rutgers who bought property in Decentraland. Upland, and he had a virtual home, beautiful virtual home. Anyway, left his shitty job at the end of the day, put his goggles on, got in, hung around his virtual home, his virtual pool, had his virtual friends over, all beautiful. What a life. Shitty life in the real world, great life in the metaverse. Until one day, he's got his goggles on, walks into his home, and who was there? Virtual squatter in his virtual home. So he says, "Hey, squatter dude, what are you doing in my virtual home?" And he goes, "Well, you weren't here, so I've moved in." And Rutgers said, "Oh, but it's my home." And he said, "Well, I don't care. I'm living here. And not only that, I'm renting it out when I'm not here and you're not here and making money." Anyway, so Rutgers goes, "Oh, how can I get this virtual avatar out of my virtual home, on my virtual land? I don't know." Went to Stanford University, top law professor, and said, "How do I get a virtual squatter out of my virtual home?" The professor said, "You got nothing. There's no precedent.
Well,
there's no rules, there's no law."
I guess.
Nothing at all.
Well, there you go. Conundrums. We could, Please thank Catriona. Wasn't that interesting?
Thank you. Thanks, my friend.
So, we are going to have, and good on you also, Catriona, not just for the content, but for breaking the swear barrier. For all subsequent speakers, it's been broken. Carte blanche, as they say. There's after morning tea now till 11:30. The Visa Lounge out there, food and drink out there. There's an outside bit there. Brett will be around, happy to sign his book. Please tweet and Insta and LinkedIn and especially TikTok and use the hashtag CuriousThinkers2022.